Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by a critically acclaimed novelist whose debut novel was longlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize and the Not the Booker Prize. She is carving her own path in this industry as she independently publishes her books alongside a thriving Substack community. It's Eleanor Anstruther. Hello.
Hello, Jamie. So nice to be here.
So nice to have you on. Let's jump right in. You've recently had a book come out, your third novel.
It's my second novel, but third book. I had a memoir come out in June
right.
as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's In Judgment of Others.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure thing. So In Judgment of Others, I've just been reading a lot of Shirley Jackson, and I've realised In Judgment of Others is sort of Shirley Jackson meets Jilly Cooper, because it's dark, but it's also quite funny, and it's set in the home counties in a market town called Midhurst. It's about a group of friends who are all part of an amateur dramatic society called the Midhurst Amateur Dramatic Society, or MADS for short. And Tessa, she's our lead character. Tessa is bipolar, but that's something that only her husband Scott and her best friend Claire know. And she is convinced by Roz, who's the sort of newest member of their crowd. She's a C-list celebrity and she's come from London. She's been there about a year. She's convinced by Roz to play Elvira, or go up for the part Elvira in Blithe Spirit. That's the show they're putting on. And for those who don't know Blithe Spirit, it is a Noel Coward play about a man wrestling with his live wife and his dead wife. And Elvira is the dead wife. So Tessa says, okay, she'll go up for the part. She gets it, but the day before rehearsals begin, she has a psychotic episode. That's how the book begins. It opens with her psychotic episode, and she is sectioned in a high security psychiatric ward in Chichester. And Roz, who is the C-list celebrity, new friend, agrees to step in and take her place as Elvira. She'll be playing against or opposite Tessa's husband, Scott, on stage. And Roz learns of Tessa's real psychiatric episode, but they all agree to keep it quiet and pretend that she's gone to Spain. But Roz also decides the best thing to do is to take Tessa a copy of the script into the psychiatric wards, which she does. And so the story unfolds with two performances of Blithe Spirit, one in Mercury Ward in the high security psychiatric unit and one on the stage in Midhurst. It's an exploration really of mental illness and of fantasy and who is telling the truth and who is not. And it's only really when Tessa finally comes out of section, sort of the last third of the book, that we find out whose imaginings through the bulk of the book have been fantasy and whose have been real. I really wanted to get into that sort of section of society and why conditions like bipolar and sort of psychosis, the kind of psychosis that Tessa has, why lying in the pond is sectioned, and why other kind of behaviours, which are just as damaging and cause just as much hurt and difficulty within the community, are celebrated. And I explore narcissism, disordered eating, and alcohol dependence.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's quite funny. There are very funny bits in it, particularly in the psychiatric ward when they're putting on Blithe Spirit, but it is also dark. And a lot of people have said to me, it's quite, I get in there, I get under the hood of psychosis, which is always my intention.
Yeah. And when you're talking about things like mental illness and sort of toxic behaviors, did you choose the setting quite deliberately to emphasize sort of areas where those things go a bit more under the rug?
Absolutely. Yeah. I really chose, it's Middle England. It's middle class, although within that middle class, there's a variation from Claire, who's at the other point of view in the novel, who runs the stables, who doesn't really have much money at all, right through up to Peter and Diane, who are Roz's brother and sister-in-law, who are very wealthy. So, but it's broadly middle class, middle England. And I chose that specifically, because I know it very well. So I was already under the hood, but also because it's within those sort of, and I'm inverting commas my fingers, polite society in which, behaviours like lying in the pond are not to be looked at, whereas drinking, a bottle of Chablis a night is apparently absolutely fine, or treating your daughter badly, or whatever it is, or making up stories about your ex. So I think, it's the Arga polo crowd that I'd really wanted to get into and just and really explore the hypocrisy within that. Because certainly that same crowd, a girl living on the street drinking a bottle of wine would probably be looked down on. But if you're sitting around a rather beautiful mahogany table, apparently it's fine. So it was all of those hypocrisies I just really wanted to get under the hood of and explore the damage, because the damage is the same.
Yeah. And it's that kind of system that allows you to just say, oh no, let's pretend like this person hasn't had a major issue and we'll just pretend they're on holiday in Spain.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of that, there's a phrase, I can't remember who came up with it, but selling the perfect. And that society is very good at selling the perfect. And it opens, as I say, with her psychotic episode, but that's preempted by her desire to push away the madness that's growing in her by doing up the kitchen. And doing up the kitchen and putting in a new island, apparently that's going to make all of the discomfort and the disquiet inside her go away. And I think that's not an uncommon response to it.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
Before this novel, like you said, you've had a few books prior to this. And am I right in thinking you're currently doing weekly chapters of your new novel?
Yes, okay, that's right. So there is slight confusion there because I've been serializing work on Substack. So I just finished serializing, what would be my third novel, Fallout, which is very excited about. It's the first piece of literary fiction set at Greenham Common, which I can never quite believe no one's done it before, but there it is. I mean, good Lord. Anyway, it's about a teenage girl who runs away to Greenham Common. It's an ensemble piece, and Greenham really is Greenham's the setting, but it's also how Greenham affects and inspires each of the 5 lives that we follow through the book. And I serialized it on Substack. I think I finished serializing it it was New Year's Eve, I think was the last chapter went out. I'm really proud of it. I'm not allowed to say anything more about that right now. We have taken it down because things are afoot, but I can't say any more than that.
Oh, I see. Okay,
yes.
Okay.
But I also did serialize In Judgment of Others, and I think I can tell you a lot about that because it's now published. I wrote In Judgment of Others in that period of time that all writers know when their debut novel is out on submission. It's a terrifying moment, and my agent said, just write something else. So I wrote this novel, which is completely different to my first novel in every way. I really jumped the tracks in terms of genre and all the rest of it. But I finished it and was proud of it, but we simply couldn't get a deal on it. So it sat in a drawer for ages until I arrived on Substack, when I knew, the only way it was going to have it to run around the park was for me to serialize it. So I got into serializing it there, and it was such a hit on Substack that I thought, hang on a minute, why don't I just independently publish this? So I did.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to get into on Substack. Substack itself, if I go on your Substack, it says over 3,000 subscribers, which is like a huge number of people. And that's on a sort of range of different subscription levels. So first of all, I'd just love to ask, like, as an overview, what sorts of things do you offer as a creator on Substack?
So a few things. When I serialize my work on there before it goes to print, or at least I have done that up until now. I may not do that again, depending on what happens for the rest of this year with various bits of work that are in production. So it was a great launch pad for that work. And anyone who's subscribed to me from the beginning has had 2 novels serialized there, and my memoir, which also came out last June, which I serialized. I wrote that straight to the page, which what that means in Substack terms is that I literally wrote it and published it every day without editing or rehearsal, which is an insane thing to do. But I just arrived on Substack at that moment in time and didn't know any better. But it actually worked out quite well. I probably will never do that again. But anyway, now I run an interview series called 8 Questions, which is one of those 3 a.m. ideas. I just really wanted to talk about Substack and how it's been, the impact it's had on my life and why I arrived there. And nobody was asking me, so I asked myself and published that. Published that and called it 8 Questions. And then I started asking my friends, and it's just grown arms and legs, and it's now running through Substack. And the most wonderful people are agreeing. I had Nick Hornby come on it. Jamila Jamil came on. Just had Ros Barber, a feature on Monday. So really wonderful. Subscribers, they have that for free. 8 Questions is always for free. I also talk about all the events and classes I'm running now. I run classes on serialization. I've just done a thing on Arvin for people new to Substack. So I'll always advertise and write posts about that. I also write posts about the independent publishing life, my experience publishing In Judgment of Others. So lots of articles and resources around independent publishing. And then lately, because the practice of writing every single day is such a good one for me, and that is writing posts that take no longer than a minute to read. It's a bit like The Artist's Way. I started doing that again. So, but those are for paid subscribers, and it's called The Obsessive Diary. And the reason it's for paid subscribers is simply because I'm doing it purely for me and my practice. And it's my diary. I could be writing it in a book, but I'm writing it on Substack. But, you know, if people want to read it, they're very welcome to, but they need to pay me a little subscription to do that, which they are incredibly. Can't quite believe it. But there you go. Very grateful to all of them. So that's a mixture of things. And I do a lot of promotion of other people's work because that's the beauty of Substack. You know, I say this advice to anyone. If you want to get going on Substack, the 2 things to do are write what fascinates you and support those who fascinate you. And your life there will be happy.
Okay. Just fixes all your problems.
All your problems, yeah.
Yeah. You don't need to redo your kitchen and put an island in. You need to make a Substack.
Exactly. I'll tell you the other thing I'm doing actually as well, and this goes out to anybody who's interested. Anyone listening, if you're not on Substack yet, and particularly if you're a literary fiction writer, although I'd very happily interview anyone else, I'm doing lots of live interviews now. And those are super fun, very low stakes. We publicise them the day before, we get live on the app, we chat as if it was just like this, like you and I chatting, but it just so happens that people can jump on and listen. And it's a really great way for anyone interested in joining Substack, especially literary fiction writers. It's a great way to introduce yourself to my crowd and to Substack. So do please get in touch if you want to be interviewed by me live on Substack app. It's a lot of fun. And then I send out those recordings. So everyone gets those for free as well. Okay,
great. Okay, awesome. So your first 2 books, they were traditionally published, right? So this came about because... My first book, A Perfect Explanation, was my debut book, of which I'm still super proud. I'm glad to say it's a long time ago now, but I'm really proud of that book. It took a decade to write, like most debuts. And we sold it to the wonderful Salt Books, who published it beautifully. We also sold it. We got a deal in America and Italy, so it came out all over the place. And that was wonderful. And I got lots and lots of publicity. I sold a lot of books. And I think, wonderful as it was, the only problem with it was it gave me a completely false impression of this writing life, because I thought, great, easy, fantastic, let's go, just imagining that the next one I would sell and do just as well. But it was a bit like I was flown to my version of the top of the mountain. I had such a good time, and then I was sent back down to the bottom of the mountain and told, now you have to walk. And as a result, I have been walking one foot in front of the other, having sulked probably for about a year, stamped my foot for another year,
Do you know what I mean? Like it really, it was emotionally and psychologically quite the kind of pull yourself together and stop complaining moment, which is, you know, and Substack really helped me with that. So no, the memoir that came out last June, I knew I couldn't get a deal on that because I'm not famous, and who wants to publish my memoir, even though, you know. So I wrote it live to the page on Substack as an exercise. That's what gained me subscribers. That completely transformed my presence there. And then I published it. And but I didn't do any marketing for it again because it had already done its heavy lifting. And I really wanted to try out Troubadour, who were the hybrid publisher that I work with. Mm-hmm. So it's out there, but I've done almost no publicity for it at all. But Troubadour proved to be really reliable. And so for In Judgment of Others, I've given it the full bells and whistles.
Okay, so was it when you were back at the bottom of the mountain and you were a bit like, oh, I have to start again, and that kind of obviously a frustrating place to be? And when you started the Substack, presumably it wasn't like a multi kind of layered subscription system, like you didn't have everything going on. Was it just a free thing that you were just doing and you thought, let's see what this is like? Yeah,
because I knew nothing about it, and I still think of myself as a technophobe, even though I have figured most of it out. But I was desperate. I really was. I'd had, I think, 4 years in the boondocks of just not getting a deal, not getting work out there. And as a traditional, being traditionally published means, especially when you're at the beginning, it means there's long periods of time when there's a complete silence. Yeah. There's no engagement with readers. You're not out there doing stuff. I wasn't a jobbing writer as I am now. I hadn't established this network of writing articles and that kind of stuff. So I would write a book. It didn't sell. I would cry. I'd pull myself together. I'd write another one. It didn't sell. I would cry. And this went on for years. And, God loved my agent, Jenny Saville. She has stood by me, continues to stand by me, really believes in the work. She felt just as upset as I did that we couldn't get off the tricky second album. And so
this podcast is sponsored by Ramp.
I can't sleep.
What is it now?
It's the company. It's chaos.
What's chaos now?
The numbers, the expenses, the books. What if we get audited?
No one's gonna audit you at 3 a.m. Go to sleep.
I can't sleep.
You could if you used Ramp.
Who said that?
I don't care because they're right. Go to sleep and sign up for Ramp in the morning, Jerry.
Ramp is the corporate card that handles all your tedious financial operations automatically, integrates directly with your ERP, and gives you complete control over every transaction. Ramp gives you everything you need for bulletproof books and a better night's sleep.
Wow. That is exactly what my company needs.
Yes, and exactly what I also need. Go to sleep, Jerry.
Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
And so then I was talking to my friend Fiona Melrose, whose wonderful book has just come out, by the way, Even Beyond Death. It's brilliant. I'm plugging it for her. It's great. She's going to be interviewed by me in a couple of weeks in Substack. And we were chatting and we were just talking, comforting each other in our misery. And we talked about agency and finding ways to reach readers, finding a way around. And then I think I read an article by Hanif Qureshi, and because he was really the biggest first name to really bring Substack into, certainly on my radar. And I subscribed, I went in, I opened an account, and it was just, at the time, it was just called Eleanor's Substack. That was it. And there were no notes, there was no chat, there was no nothing, all the services you have now. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to write every day and I'm going to press publish every day. And I'm not going to think about tomorrow or yesterday. I'm just going to do it as an exercise. And it absolutely transformed my life because very, very quickly people started commenting, subscribing, talking to me. I started meeting other writers. I've met people who've become really dear friends. I've just been in America visiting a whole bunch of them in IRL, as my children would say. In IRL. And it's absolutely, and I'm now, talking and meeting and working with, the sort of top brass of Substack who created the entire thing. And I keep saying to them, what you've done is more than just create a platform for artists to, create their own wares. You've created this kind of liminal space of trackways where we find each other. I mean, it really is absolutely transformative. I can't quite understand how they've done it, apart from the fact that the algorithms aren't trying to sell you anything or bubble you or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, I arrived with zero, nothing. And I've now got 10,000 followers, which for me is like, what the? And over 3,000 subscribers and a whole load of people paying to read my work. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It.
Yeah. Especially in an industry where, I would probably say the majority of authors don't make enough money from their advances and their royalties to cover their living costs. So most of them do have, other forms of income or jobs or whatever.
I've made more this year from Substack than I've made in the last 3 years from selling books.
Wow.
I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Do you think this is a viable route that more authors should at least look into?
Yes, and what I'm really keen on, my Substack now, I developed it I've honed it really, and it is the literary obsessive now, and I champion independent fiction. But crucially, I want to see how independent literary fiction artists can work in tandem with the mainstream. So this isn't an either or, because both, there's pluses and minuses to both. If you're an independent, it's really hard work, but you obviously retain your rights and complete agency. If you're mainstream, you get carried along, but you can also get lost depending on what level you are and what money is put into your marketing and publicity. Mm-hmm. So I would really love to see more literary fiction writers join Substack and use it as a place to market test or try out or even publish original work there, just as a tandem effort. I've been I had a great chat with Sam Jordison recently, and I asked him, that's Galley Beggar Press, I asked him what Galley Beggar, would they view published on Substack as published? And he said, no, we do not consider that. I then had another conversation with somebody in a mainstream sort of big five publishing, and they felt that artists could publish up to 10% on Substack and then pull it if they were going to submit to mainstream. And then literary fiction, literary magazines have got another set of rules again, and competitions have another set of rules again. So it's was worth looking and finding out. But I think what Substack, the gap it really fills in is, and I always get this from 8 questions. I've seen it now after over a year of artists responding to those questions. It's a place where you can publish what you cannot publish elsewhere. And I don't mean that in inciting hatred and, violence. I mean, good speech as opposed to, right speech. You can really artistically spread your wings on Substack, and you have complete agency over it, and you can try work out. And then you can also submit to mainstream and submit to independent publishers or publish it yourself. And one should not exclude the other. But I think we can all agree, and I really understand the reasons for this, but mainstream, and what I meant by mainstream, I'm talking big five, mainstream publishing, it does have a marketing issue. It does there's a growing reputational issue with the books that are pushed versus what we find when we open the covers. And I think there's there's an exhaustion by readers about being told something is the best next thing ever. They buy the book, and that's now the marketing people's job done. They open it and feel that actually they're just being served either something they've read before or something that's just not good enough. Now, there are a lot of amazing independent publishers out there like Galley Beggar who are really still flying the flag. And also there are wonderful people working in mainstream who are really flying the flag, but they're up against a lot of marketing straits. And I think on Substack, you can really explore and break ground. And I think that's exciting. And I think readers want it. And you can gather up readers there. Whether you then go on to publish mainstream or indie. Yeah.
Well, like you say, it's a purely creative zone, whereas a publisher has to look at something, it's a business and it has to look at something as a commercial product.
It's a business. And I always stress that I really do understand that, but I also really understand that, the reading public are brilliant and they are clever and they can take new ground. They want it. They actually want the best stuff, the new stuff, that they want to be tested. They want their brains stretched. They want their reading experience to be something new. And perhaps big marketing, they can't take that risk, and I get that. But smaller indies and independent artists and Substack writers, we can. And it's beholden on us, I think, to keep doing that, to market test it as well, and just to show if we're going to break the paradigm, this is how we do it.
Yeah, I think that's true. Before we head over to the desert island, I do want to ask, whilst we're talking about Substack, if an author wanted to, experiment or look into doing something like what you've done, whether it be Substack or Patreon or whatever kind of service it is, what advice would you give them to get going?
Well, contact me and I will live interview you. That's the first thing. I'll talk you through it. No, it's a good way to start, because you'll be immediately introduced to 10,000 people immediately by being interviewed by me, if they decide they want to click on that interview, which they often do. That's the first thing. I would say that when you first begin, I would keep it really simple. A lot of people, when they begin, they overpromise and underproduce because they get overexcited. So I would say do the opposite. Start small, keep the bar low, keep it really simple. Think about the DNA of your Substack being very clear. So the best Substacks, the ones that rise very quickly, are things like my friend Chloe Hope's Death and Birds. It's a Substack that's literally about death and birds, and the clue's in the title. You know what I mean? So you just keep it really simple. So when I click on your Substack, your title will tell me exactly what it's about. I would avoid the word musings. It's really overused. And I tend to never, ever click on somebody who describes their stack as musings about something, because it's an overused word on Substack. So keep it simple, keep the bar low in terms of what you're going to deliver. Take your time, and particularly imagine Substack is a playground, and the nice kind, not the kind where you stood in the corner and got bullied when you were 5, like I did. It's a great, fantastic, creative playground full of brilliant people who all want to support you. So go in there with a really, really playful attitude and just muck about and have fun and be supportive and ask lots of questions, ask me questions, and build slowly. Would be my advice.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good advice. And I think it's, for a lot of authors, it's definitely something worth looking at, whether you pursue it or not. It's definitely a new avenue that I think has opened up within publishing, and definitely worth a look.
It's a string to your bow. And can I just say that I know for a fact that there are editors and agents reading and watching new artists on Substack. So it's a good way to, it's good to get on board now, and it's a good way to show who you are. Okay.
Yeah. Good advice there. So we are around the halfway point for the episode, and that means I'm going to ship you off and strand you in the middle of the ocean and ask you, Eleanor, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
Yes, I've thought about this a lot, and bizarrely to me, because it's not the book I imagined I'd say, I think it's Middlemarch.
Okay.
And I say that, not that I don't love George Eliot, because I love George Eliot. I'm surprised at myself because I read it a long time ago, and I did my A-levels, was Middlemarch, English A-level was Middlemarch. And, I didn't love it as much as I've loved other George Eliots at all. But there's something about my age now, looking back, and my mother often mentioned it, and I sort of feel that I've reached a maturity now where I think reading it again, and I am going to reread it. While I was thinking about which book it would be, and I knew it would be Middlemarch, I thought, okay, I'm going to reread that. I think I will consume it, I will digest it in a way that I wasn't capable back then when I was 18. I will understand it better. And so for that reason, it's a big book, because George Eliot is one of my greatest teachers. I always learn from her. And yes, I feel like I'll enjoy reading it again. And I was going to say, once I've read it, I'll rip it up and burn it for fire, but I won't, because I couldn't do that. I heard about someone the other day saying when they travel, they rip out the pages so there's less to carry. Can you imagine doing that?
What? What do they do? Just throw them away?
Me. It's really upset. It's like, good God.
Yeah.
So I will keep it. Maybe I'll use it as a very severe pillow.
Very severe. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I'm always impressed when people can go back to books that they were forced to study as a teenager.
Yeah.
Because for me, it ruined that literature for me. And it's hard for me to think fondly on especially when you're forced to study something, which is obviously not the way that the author intended you to read that.
No, I mean, I don't imagine she intended 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds to be reading it. I mean, it's ridiculous. And if I were queen of the empress of the world, I would change the education system, starting with English A-level. I mean, good Lord.
Yeah, they really need to revamp some of the books on the curriculum. They
really need to revamp it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because there's sometimes I read a book and I'm like, this should be studied in schools because it's age appropriate and it's just brilliant. Like, I think A Monster Calls is so obvious for me that should be on English literature curriculum. Right.
I mean, Stephen King, anything that gets them in is exciting. When my son was doing, I think he was actually his GCSEs, and he completely fell in love with Murakami, and they wouldn't let him read it. They made him read to Jane Austen, and God knows I love Jane Austen, but he was like, I don't care. And I said, I don't blame you. Why do you, Pride and Prejudice for a 17-year-old boy? I mean, what the hell? It's like, anyway, I'd even go so far as to say a lot of the Shakespeare, it's just, don't put them off, get them in. Once you're in and you've fallen in love with a written word, you will read anything.
Yeah.
You've got to fall in love.
The thing that breaks my heart, because I love and adore Shakespeare, and it's because my mother, when me and my sister were very young, basically like took us to see so much Shakespeare before we were old enough that we had to study it. And it's a play, and it's wild to me that the school board thinks that the first experience you should have of Shakespeare is reading it as an academic text.
It's
when I'm like,
insane.
That's not the form. That's not how it's supposed to be experienced.
Take them to the Globe.
Exactly.
I mean, I admit now, I don't love Shakespeare. I don't, because exactly that was my first experience, Romeo and bloody Juliet. The most exciting thing about that was my teacher, Mr. Wincott, who I was madly in love with. So that's what I always think of when I was 13, and I've never got over it. I don't think I've ever, I don't want to, I feel bad saying it, but I don't love it.
Yeah. Because I don't know, you need to, if you're going to teach it, you need to, before you even start reading it, everyone should have seen, the whole class should have seen it performed on a stage somewhere as was intended. As was intended,
standing up in the rain, shouting, being raucous, the whole 9 yards, exactly. Whereas I do love, my very earliest reading was sort of proper sort of grown-up books with a very early Jilly Cooper, she wrote a series, and I can't think of any of them, Bella and all these, like a bit like Mills and Boon, but they were Jilly Cooper.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with the written, and then Narnia, it's like, and then off I went. And so I was able to love, I didn't hate Middlemarch when I read it as an A-level student, but I didn't appreciate what was happening before my very eyes. And I would now, as a writer, technically I'd be like, wow. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. I don't think I will ever give The Changeling another chance. So
no, there are plenty of books. That's the thing. I mean, these days as well, I don't force myself to. If I'm really not liking something, I just stop. I might, I might push through if I know that it's just a technically, it's it's having to stretch my brain. I might push myself through. I'm thinking of Praiseworthy, which actually I didn't have to push that much, but it's a heck of a book to read, Alexis Wright. You do have to kind of gird your loins and go, okay, take a deep breath. But if I'm reading something that I just think, no, I just stop now. I just go, no, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, I've come around to that as well. When I was younger, I would force myself to finish things, even if I was not enjoying it. But sometimes, especially with more literary stuff, there is like, it can be very rewarding kind of persevering through
There's the push through. I always think of Unbearable Lightness of Being, and that was the novel that I pushed through when I first read it. Mm-hmm. And then I read it again and was glad I had. And then I read it again recently. And again, as a much more mature person, and now as a professional writer, I read it on a completely different level and was utterly blown away by it, technically and on a literary level and everything. So yeah, I think, and I had this conversation actually with somebody recently in America, a professor, like, yes, he wants books to be hard. So it's not hard. I don't mind tough or hard, like, I got to work. Yeah. But I do mind badly written. I do mind that. Okay, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah. What I'm getting is you're not a fan of romantasy.
Well, do you know, I haven't actually read any romantasy, but because genre-wise, I do have a thing about magical realism, although Praiseworthy, in a sense, is kind of really sails very close to the magical realism wind. But I tend to not be so genre. I'm not interested in genre. I'm interested in literary fiction. I think that's the thing. And Sean McNulty and I have been trying to define literary fiction, and we've decided it's two things. It's free of cliche and depth. And as long as it's free of cliche and has depth, I don't care what genre it is. Yeah. I can see that as because it is one of those hard things to define. Yeah, it is. It's difficult. But I think that's the one I've sort of settled on for me, and I think somebody else might define it differently, but that's the one I'm really comfortable with. Speed and density and free of cliche. Okay, great. Yeah.
So next up, I'd love to get a bit more into publishing side of things, chat a bit more about Troubadour, which you mentioned, and also I'd love to talk a bit about kind of your literary agent and as an indie publisher, kind of what that conversation was like. All of that will be available in the extended episode on patreon.com/rightandwrong. Yes, we will see. Anyway, we're out of time. That was great. I feel we covered a lot of ground there. It was great. Thank you so much,
my pleasure,
Eleanor, for coming on the podcast and chatting with me and telling me about everything you've been up to and your kind of exciting waves that you're making within publishing.
Oh, it's been so much fun. And if you would like to come on and be live interviewed by me on Substack, Jamie, just say the word. We'll set it up.
That would be great. I'd love that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And for anyone listening, if you're interested in Eleanor's Substack, The Literary Obsessive, you can find it at eleanoranstruther.substack.com. You can follow her on Instagram at Eleanor Anstruther, on Blue Sky at @Anstruther, or you can head over to her website, eleanoranstruther.com. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe, join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcasts, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Eleanor, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.